I shocked some people when I went on local television here in Boston. I said that Elizabeth Warren is the single biggest lobbyist for the banking industry that we have today. And I think it comes down to, she wants control. And if she can get us to have only 5 or 6 major banks and she can control those banks, you think about that programmable money and you think about a Federal Reserve issued CBDC. I'm not engaging in hyperbole when I say that it's the biggest threat of economic freedom of my lifetime. When they control your money, they control your life.
Welcome back to the Block Fuel Podcast. We are very excited to introduce John Deaton, who is running for senator in Massachusetts. So, John, very excited, as I just mentioned, to bring you on. You are actually our first senatorial candidate. So, welcome to Block Fuel. And if you could just quickly introduce yourself for those who may be unfamiliar with you, just a quick background, that'd be great.
Sure, guys. Thanks for having me. It really is my pleasure. Listen, I am running for U.S. Senate against Elizabeth Warren, and I'm from a unique perspective, unique background. I was born and raised in Detroit in a place called Highland Park. Detroit is ranked as one of the worst neighborhoods in America for the last 40 years. Single mother on welfare, food stamps, and no father in the picture. Overcame a lot of poverty and violence. First one to graduate from high school in my family, made it to college, made it to law school, joined the Marines, became a little bit known in the world, even though I've been a mesothelioma attorney. That's people who get cancer from asbestos. But the SEC, when they sued Ripple Labs, they didn't limit the charges to just Ripple. They basically said the token itself was a security. I got mad, to be honest with you. That's the honest answer. I knew that a lot of people were going to get crushed financially. So I sued the SEC. It went viral. 75,000 token holders joined me. The judge ended up agreeing with me, cited my brief, cited some of my work in her final decision, said XRP itself is not a security. And here we are today, and then decided if I could take on that kind of government overreach, maybe I should take on the ultimate government overreach in Senator Elizabeth Warren.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, I'm from the Midwest, Joe. I grew up in Minnesota. And it sounds like you came from pretty humble beginnings. So,
Yeah.
Besides, going against, one of the most prominent figures in the space, especially being a blockchain crypto podcast, we're all cheering for you. Probably most people listening to this podcast will be cheering for you as well. What kind of motivated you beyond maybe the Ripple? Obviously, coming from law background probably helped, but was there a defining moment, and maybe it was the Ripple case, that kind of said, all right, I need to now jump into running for Senate? Have you held any government positions prior to this? Or?
No, I was a special assistant United States attorney when I was on active duty for the District of Arizona, where I was able to, federal prosecutor in federal district court. But other than that, I've never held any type of federal position. Listen, guys, what it came down to is I told you I come from extreme poverty, extreme bad neighborhood. Violence was, everyday thing. When you look at me, you really are looking at the walking, breathing embodiment of the American dream and everything that's possible. If you get an opportunity and you're willing to work hard, and you take some talent, you couple it with incredible work ethic, and you can become successful. And I see that dream dying before my eyes. You take someone like Senator Warren, and I question why, with illegal immigration, with an open border, with debt crisis where 40% of Americans don't have $500 in case of an emergency, the government $34 trillion in debt, credit card debt over $1 trillion, student loan debt at $1.6 trillion, opioid addictions, foreign wars, all these massive issues, and she wakes up and says that she's going to focus on crypto. Yeah. And it just literally scratched my head. And then I saw that I couldn't understand why, guys, like with all those real world issues, why is she focusing on building an anti-crypto army? Then she went on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and said, America's ready for a Federal Reserve issued CBDC. And so to me, George Orwell started spinning over in his grave, and
Mhm.
it's the single biggest threat to economic freedom of my lifetime. And so that's not the only reason I got in, but that was part of the reason. Well, we need someone to go deal with those real issues because, quite honestly, it may be important to us and your audience, but crypto itself isn't like a top 10 issue for people in Massachusetts. And so,
Mhm.
why is she trying to deprive people of this asset class? And I just think it comes down to she's the epitome of Washington, D.C. 12 years ago, she went to hold the bankers accountable. And we all know on this call know who wrote her last bill, the bankers. And that's what happens in D.C. And so I just wanted to challenge her because I think enough people are sick and tired of it.
They fly on their private jets and then tell everyone to go
Yeah.
green. Yeah,
Yeah, she's
it,
famous for condemning the Jets, but there's that video of her trying to hide behind one of her aides as she's walking off a private jet. So I think we're all tired of these hypocrites in Washington elites telling us how to live our life and what we can own and what we can't own.
Yeah, John.
100%.
Before we
amen.
move on, would love just to get your take, further on, yeah, what's behind it. I think everyone in the rest of the country is like, what's driving this like anti crypto ethos, and we've seen like I think in the is it SAB 120 vote that was recent, it became a little bit bipartisan, and I think you had certain camps like one of the theories floated out was like even Nancy Pelosi's camp was like, wait, let's kind of float something out to see if like if we vote pro crypto, if it's going to affect our base. And eventually they decided like, yeah, there's nothing positive we're getting out of supporting Elizabeth Warren with our constituents. So let's just vote pro crypto on this because it's going to be better for us overall.
Yeah, I think, listen, it was something I scratched my head about because I really couldn't understand it. But I think it comes down to, you know, I shocked some people when I went on local television here in Boston. I said that Elizabeth Warren is the single biggest lobbyist for the banking industry that we have today. And I think it comes down to, she wants control. And if she can get us to have only 5 or 6 major banks and she can control those banks, you think about that programmable money and you think about a Federal Reserve issued CBDC. I'm not engaging in hyperbole when I say that it's the biggest threat of economic freedom of my lifetime. When they control your money, they control your life. Like it, as everybody on here knows, that programmable money can be turned off and turned on. It can be limited geographically. Maybe you donate to a ABC company and the federal government says, "Oh, wait a minute, we think those are a little extreme." All of a sudden they start turning your money off and seeing how you spend your money, where you spend your money. I mean, that's just Big Brother. And I think that these Washington elites like Senator Warren, they get in DC, they get addicted to that kind of power and that kind of control. And they just become, they want to fight for the status quo. Anything that disrupts the status quo and the way things they are, that they have in place, that they're in control of, they don't want that to change. And I mean, that's the best explanation I can give you, brother.
Just to double click into the CBDCs, because we brought on someone that was working for the Biden administration, and she was tapping into like, it's not going to happen overnight. We just talked to someone over at Aon. They're like, that's ready to go at MIT like today. And so, I see kind of both sides. You saw what happened with the truckers in Canada, of course, as well. Now, how different it is, I just want to kind of make sure that our audience understands like the difference between, because today the government probably could shut off your credit cards and freeze your bank account if they really saw something, that they wanted to do that with. So what's the difference now with the CBDC? And I guess if you have the platform to share with our audience, like what scares you the most there?
Well, the first thing I would say is where else in the world right now is a central bank digital currency that is controlled by the federal government or the government? Where is it being implemented on a wide scale basis? And the only country right now is China. So we got to first ask ourselves, is that the example that we want to follow? But at the end of the day, it's yes, I think you're right. The government has ways to cutting off your credit card and all that. But when you think about the centrality of a distributed ledger where they're going to know your digital identity and they're going to see where you're spending your money, how you're spending your money on every single purchase, and they can have that kind of control. That's the reason she had, when I say she, Senator Warren has this bill that bans self custody of Bitcoin. It's a de facto ban of Bitcoin and crypto assets. It's because you don't want a competitor to that central bank digital currency. So it's all about control of the government, limiting, one source of monetary transfer in the form of that CBDC. Are there advantages to obviously digital currency? And, some, it's just a slippery slope. And I certainly don't want to say, hey, China's doing it, so let us do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you were in the service. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you.
The Marines. How has that prepared you better for the roles that you've taken on in your career? And then also, probably the biggest thing you're taking on in your career right now.
Listen, I will tell you, I've never been asked that question, and kudos to you guys, because that really is a great question. And I think it comes down to what the Marine Corps, my 7.5 years of active duty in the Marine Corps as an officer. Military is all about mission accomplishment, right? Mm-hmm. And when you think about today's divided world in politics, Senator Warren and others, including Republicans too, both sides, they engage in this division. They engage in finger pointing. When you're in the military, it doesn't matter how the problem created or who's to blame for the problem. You just have to solve that problem. You have to solve that solution. When you look at the military, you're talking about, like, Marines that I was in charge of. We're talking about, there's Christians, Catholic, Muslims, the diversity's there, ethnic diversity, social, economic, rich kids, poor kids. And so you're allowed to say, you know what, we got to solve this problem. Yeah. This is our objective. Let's work together and get it done. And I think that translates very well today, because we need people to go to Washington, D.C. who's loyal to the country, right? Who's loyal to the country, not loyal to a party, to a person, to an agenda, but is it good for America? Is it good for Massachusetts? Is it good for America? It is. Call it a Democrat proposal. I don't care. Call it a Republican proposal. I don't care. If it's good, I'm all in. If it's bad, I'm going to fight it. And so I think that is, the military trains you well to get rid of all the noise.
Yeah.
How do we accomplish this mission right now?
I think that's spot on.
So think about the border crisis.
Yeah.
Everybody's pointing the finger. Hey, let's solve the problem. Think about the debt crisis. So you can take all of these missions, and I think it prepares you well. So
I think
kudos to you guys. Outstanding question.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. I think there's a lot of, there's too much finger pointing of how it started, who's at fault, this, that, and then you go back and forth. And at the end of the day, you just step aside and say, okay, how are we going to solve this? We know we have a problem. It's no different than what people in business go through. I know I have a problem. I don't have enough money, or I don't have this. Well, what are you going to do? It's not like you get the printer out and just go print, Right. So you got to figure out how to bring it all together. Jody, I'll turn it to you though. Definitely the topic we wanted to ask about.
Yeah, and first I'll say too, I love that ethos of just like in the military, you're going through basic, and they're crushing the ego, right? And so we need to get away from political egos being the drivers and focus on the policy, focus on America. And just like you said earlier with CBDCs in China, it's like we don't need a cult of Mao Zedong, right? We saw how that worked out. It didn't work out very well for China, and so removing the individual idols and just moving towards hey, let's fix the problem. And tack on to Sean's question, just on what shaped John Deaton. We were looking into something you had mentioned before about a battle with cancer. Could you tell about how that's kind of shaped your overall platform and some of the policies that you support?
Yeah, I know cancer well, mainly because of my job. I got lucky, guys. I was diagnosed with testicular cancer when I was young. I was still in college. And if it's found within the testicle and it hasn't spread, you have a 95% chance of survival. So I'm one of the lucky ones. But I've represented people who unfortunately have a death sentence. They have mesothelioma or lung cancer. And, I tell everyone the reality is this: we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring us. And so all you can do is fight for today, fight for the best life that you deserve. Keep fighting for the life you deserve. People get diagnosed with cancer, and you hear all of these stories. I've had clients where the average lifespan, they're told by their doctor that they won't live 12 months. I've had a client live 7 years and have a decent life. And so you just never know. So the best thing you could do is just be in the present, be the best person you can, be the best builder you can, be the best business owner you can, and try not to let what might happen sort of dictate your frame of mind. For me, overcoming poverty was a bigger deal for me because I was lucky on the cancer site.
Yeah.
And so you just got to keep driving. You can't listen. You just can't give up. Like, you can't give up. You just have to keep fighting for the life you deserve.
I think that I think that plays out very, not just on the cancer front, but I think, John, you hit it on the head, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs that watch the show, and there's a lot of times you just want to, even with poverty, all the various things, throw in the towel. You just want to say, you know what, I screw it. And I think that's important. Like, to remind people, like, don't give up. Like, things do get better over time, sometimes, and obviously,
No,
yeah,
you're 100% right, man. They do, and listen, giving up is easy, right? You throw your hands up and you just give up. And for the entrepreneurs, I would just say to them, listen, one of the best definitions of entrepreneurship is, a willingness to live, a few years like most people won't, in order to try to have a chance to live more years like most people can't. You know what I mean? And you got to be willing to put in that sacrifice. And if you're willing to do that and never give up, then you can accomplish a lot. It may take you longer,
yeah,
because it certainly took me longer. Like, I thought that in my 30s, I would be where I was. And it took me, probably 12 years longer to achieve a financial level of security. But I don't view giving up as a choice.
Yeah.
So you might as well suck it up and do the best you can.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting coming from, your position, right? It's very inspiring for someone that may be in a very bad neighborhood, looking up, and I was very fortunate. My family was able to help out with college, and a lot of people do not get that opportunity, right? And so, coming from that background, it's been this, I think, a myth that the Democrats are there to help, a lot of those people. It seems to me that a lot of the times they'll put them in this cycle and kind of keep them there and give them the $1,200 stipend, or stimmy check. And they're not thinking about that every single item is costing 50 cents more or 50% more now. And it's funny when you hear politicians speak and everyone listening is like, that's not the reality, though, of what's going on. Like, I can't go to the grocery store without dropping $60 on 2 items, basically, here in New York, right? So coming from that, when it comes to potential like CBDCs mixed with like welfare, is that something that like scares you even more? I guess coming from that, I don't know if you were individually on welfare, but a lot of folks that may be underprivileged are in that system. Like what's your take on that? If you're able to talk a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm looking forward. You see, I think I'm the right messenger because Elizabeth Warren, one of the things that she likes to talk about is income inequality. And it's not a political slogan to me. It is, I live with it and hear it. And when we talk about crypto, maybe at some point, I'll tell you my foray into Bitcoin and this world. It's very personal to me. But listen, I listen to my mom cry at night. And not every night. I'm not suggesting it was every night. Most nights, clearly, she was able to put food on the table. But there were, more than a few nights that she put us to bed hungry, and I would listen to her cry herself to sleep. And you could hear, you could feel the visceral, like, humiliation and shame, guilt, all these things that she's beating herself up, probably laying there like, what kind of mother are you? You can't feed your children, all those things. And that affects you. And so I know what it's like to wait for the welfare check as a kid. I wasn't on welfare as an adult, but as a child, certainly I was, and I needed it. Like, let me make it clear: I'm not saying that we shouldn't be there for people in need. We should, but being dependent on the government, Elizabeth Warren and others saying, "Well, here's an extra $100 in food stamps." That's not lifting people up. If she was willing to lift people up, then why does she support the accredited investor rule, which excludes 92% of the population because they don't have a net asset value of $1 million, not including your home? And so, I tell everybody she's great at fighting against things and against people. For example, fighting against the rich and the wealthy is not the same as fighting for the poor and the middle class. And so I want to get people off of dependence on government. It's debilitating. It's depressing, and get them off. Second thing is we got to get off this punishing success kind of mentality. I never hated rich people as someone who was dirt poor. I might say, do you got 10 minutes? Will you tell me what you know? How do I get where you're at? Like, I may be, bug you with some questions, but I certainly didn't hate you. And this division that she has of pitting American versus American and punishing success, to me, is insane. We should be fostering it, facilitating it. And so I'm looking forward to showing people that there's a way to uplift you and not tear you down, not tear people down. So,
yeah. No, I mean, you kind of touched on it really. I would love to hear really about how you got into Bitcoin.
Sure.
Tell us about that journey. I mean, I think everybody's got a unique one, and
yeah,
I think you would.
Well, mine's very personal. I kept hearing Bitcoin. This is late 2016. I wish I could sit here and say I heard about it in 2012 or 13. I didn't. So it's late 2016, and I read the Bitcoin white paper, and the first thing I thought about was my mom, because my mom could not keep a checking account at the bank. Whatever the minimum fee was, $10 or whatever it was, balance you had to keep, we would ultimately need that money. So at some point, if she were to deposit her welfare check in the bank, they were going to take too much of it from the fees. So my mom would go, if you ever go to the inner city, you'll see check cashing stores in the ghetto in the inner city. You also see check cashing, Western Union, Liquor, Lotto.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she would go to those places and they would cash her welfare check and they would charge her 10%, 15%, 12%. So she had a $200 check, and I would watch my mom literally beg, debase herself, begging them, can you please take $10 instead of $20? We need the money. When I got to college and I would send my mom money because I had two younger siblings, I'm waiting tables. I'm trying to send her, say, $100 or $50. It's through Western Union. They're charging 12%. So when I read the Bitcoin white paper, I thought, wow, you cut out the banks, you cut out the MoneyGrams, the Western Unions, these predatory fees that the bank industry has, underbanked, or, unbanked or underbanked people like my mom. It could really benefit them. So that was my journey of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And just like everybody else, I probably got a little obsessive. I'm watching shows like yours and everybody else's on YouTube. I'm searching everything I can. And then I sort of, became a true believer. I also thought about capitalism and free markets. If you're a unbanked woman in Nigeria and you have a smartphone and you can create a website and you can make straw hats, you can make some kind of clothing. You could be an independent artist with you have this talent and you could sell directly person to person, not need a bank. All you need is a digital wallet, get your Bitcoin or crypto. To me, it was like truly a revolution for freedom, capitalism, and poor people. And so that's sort of my foray into the space.
Yeah, John, one of our early podcast guests was Truck Coin Swap, and it's in that same problem. And what they're doing is finding a solution for the 20 to 30% that freight factoring companies take. So you have all these truckers that want to get paid earlier than the net 60, net 90 days, but 20%, 30%, it really adds up. And it's very similar to your story. It's like you have these companies trying to like, hey, we can use digital assets to solve this. Going into your platform and your campaign and your policies, like what are your focuses on just the digital asset side? Beyond CBDCs, like, where do you see bills that you want to push forward?
Well, the thing that I think politicians need to understand is that they looked at Bitcoin, stable coins, or crypto in general as a threat to the dollar, right? That it was going to be, it somehow would threaten the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency and somehow weaken it. And I think the truth is, if you implement it the right way and you implement stablecoin legislation the right way, you can actually bolster the U.S. dollar and strengthen its position in the world and make sure that it stays the world's reserve currency, so to speak. So that's the first thing, is educating politicians. Again, you imagine you're in control and in power of the status quo. You don't want to change, right? You're in power of it. And so anything that comes along and is disruptive and could affect immediate fees. So if you think at the banking industry or the MoneyGrams or them, they like charging 10% for cross-border payments, right? If you're a worker here and you're sending money home to Venezuela or to Mexico or to Portugal or wherever, they like taking, that friction. And, but when you think about, I don't know, last time you guys did a wire transfer, but it could take 2-3 days still, before a wire transfer. And so, and there could be fees associated. So when you can move money that way with a fraction of a penny, I think that is a lot. But my legislation would be, Congress has to do their job. Why are we trying to pigeonhole 1933 law, a 1946 Supreme Court case on orange grows, and trying to apply it to artificial intelligence and modern day blockchain technology? Right? That's insane. So we need Congress to do their job and to write legislation that is adaptive to the technology we have. In my state where I'm running, Massachusetts, we have Harvard, we have MIT. It usually innovation, if there's legislation and regulatory clarity and it fosters innovation, Massachusetts usually will be a leading state, and so it really would be punishing severely any kind of fraud. I do believe consumers should be protected. When you look at the SEC, you ask, why are you focusing on Library and Ripple and Coinbase 2 years after you give them an IPO, but you miss Celsius and FTX and all these others? So it's all about fostering innovation, but protecting the consumer.
Definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think Avi and Jody are definitely in the same camp. When it comes to the technology that Bitcoin, blockchain, you've touched on it a little, but how it's going to really change lives, things like that. What are your thoughts on that? Are you thinking that Bitcoin is really going to change a lot of lives, or digital assets? And how do we prevent it from going? You always have bad actors. So how do you prevent the bad actors so that you have positivity and not negative effects of it?
Yeah, listen, I think that whether or not crypto and blockchain fulfills its potential promise is yet to be seen. I think that's fair. I think that, Bitcoin has certainly won the narrative of digital gold, and it is hard money, and it's a way to, hedge against the debasement of the U.S. dollar. I mean, guys, I read a statistic that nearly 80% of all U.S. dollars in circulation were printed in the last 3.5 years. I mean, that's just a staggering, and I had it double checked to make sure before I said it that it was accurate. That's just staggering. In January of 2021, the very beginning, I think there was $4 trillion in circulation. Today, there's 19 trillion. I mean, it just shows you the difference. And so I think Bitcoin, when Larry Fink of BlackRock calls it a safe haven asset, it's arrived. Now, does that mean that 20,000 crypto tokens out there in the universe, are all legitimate and have utility? No. But I think that blockchain and crypto is here to stay. And I think I think certain things, when the Department of Defense, for example, they haven't passed an audit in a decade. So just think about that. We're talking about $790 billion a year. And they can't pass an audit. You have these theories of, well, where's the F-35 or where's this? They can't document where equipment went. Imagine that being on a immutable ledger, on blockchain, where you can see every single transaction, stuff like that. So I think that it certainly can eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse in the government spending. And so it's a technology that we need to implement. And I think that real world utility, cross-border payments, for example, where you don't need these Nostra accounts, where a bank has to have $10 million in pesos so that they can make their transactions from US dollars to pesos. You can use crypto as a bridge asset or stable coins. There's lots of ways that it can improve friction and improve lives. Like I said earlier, spread capitalism and participation in an economy. So, I can't say it'll fulfill its promise, but it does have, I think, a good promise.
Yeah. One thing I would say, and I'm just feeling the energy from you, is you are a candidate that feels like you came from humble beginnings. You feel like you're fighting for Americans, where you do see some of the people on the other sides where you're like, who are you fighting for? Yourself, right? And so being able to these people are elected, right? And so they should be there. We're the ones that are paying you guys ultimately through tax dollars and things like that. And so that's really good to hear. You talked about all this missing, there's trillions of dollars missing before 9/11. And I've dug into this. And so I would love taxation to be on the blockchain so Americans could see where this is going. Obviously, I don't think that's going to happen overnight or maybe ever, but would love to hear your take beyond. I know we've talked a lot about crypto. There's a crypto podcast, but anything else? Because I'd love to see you elected. Well,
thank you.
John Deaton for Senate. To go and donate. Are you number one? I saw that Trump started taking Bitcoin and different denominations of currency. Are you also able to fundraise?
Yeah, you can donate through crypto on JohnDeatonForSenate.com, and I appreciate that. Listen, here's the thing: when you look at the Senate, I overcame poverty, I was in my early 40s. A father at that point. I have 3 daughters now, but 2 daughters, student loan in debt. I know what it's like to feel like you're struggling. I opened a small business, so I put $100,000 in credit card debt to start my business, and so I know what it feels like to have that pressure. I'm writing checks, hoping that check clears before this check. I know that experience. And when you look at the Senate and you look at Congress, I don't think you see enough people at least, that have that real world experience. They call it public service for a reason, right? Now I'm doing well at this stage in my life. I'm 57 years old, but I made my money before I went to Washington, right? Let me make that clear. Whereas a lot of these people go to Washington, they go there broke, and then they come out, 12 years later, 15 years later, worth $100 million. It's like, how did that happen? Yeah. And so I think we need to restore confidence, because let's face it, do you think the American public has a lot of faith in any of these agencies right now?
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
And piggybacking on that too, we were talking, and I asked if I could ask this on the on the podcast here, but like we see like Pelosi tracker and Twitter has actually done a phenomenal job. There's just so many like experts now like digging into files and being able to see that, hey, all these senators, all these governors, like there's a reason they make X like $100,000 salary and then they're in yachts and have $100 million net worth, right? It's because they
Right.
see the bills that are about to be passed, or they have insider information basically, and then they get rich off the stock, and it's still going on like today. So I'd love your take if that's something that, you know, someone that's running for Senate, it does seem enticing as a human
Yeah,
to
listen,
be like take
I'm
advantage of
someone.
that. But
First bill I'm going to write is term limits.
Yeah.
Right. You have 2 terms as a senator, so you get 12 years. You get 12 years. If you can't effectuate change or help bring change in more than a decade, time for you to move over, give someone with fresher ideas, different energy, whatever, different skill set to come in and do it. Second thing, I don't think you should be able to go be the chairman of the FDA on a Friday, resign, and on Monday you're on Pfizer's board. It just look. I mean, it looks bad. Whether or not they did. If you're the SEC chairman on one week, and then the next week you're on like Goldman Sachs board and J.P. Morgan's board and all this, it looks like you sold out, even if you didn't. So there should be like this a statutory period of maybe 3 years before you can go from that government role to there. Individual stocks is public service. So for your 10 years or 12 years in service, you're just not going to agree to not own individual stocks. You know,
They're in a blind
if
trust.
that's a problem, then don't go in. Right. But like, listen, Nancy Pelosi, and we were talking about the accredited investor rule. So imagine this: you're serving in the military, right? You're a career person. You're not making a lot of money. You can't own pre-IPO shares of Visa, but Nancy Pelosi can vote on a bill that helps Visa, gets it passed, and then her and her husband make millions off being a special deal, discounted deal on pre-IPO shares of Visa. And then, of course, Visa goes public and they sell on the public offering and make millions and millions of dollars. That's right. That's got to stop. How's that not insider trading? But they exempt themselves from it. And so we have to clean up and restore confidence. It's called public service, not let me go get everything I can get for myself and get paid.
Yeah. And John, I know we're getting close on time, but you're also an author. Tell us about your book, what it's about, and then like just the experience writing a book.
Oh, well, listen, I appreciate it. If you read the book, you will know that I never intended on running for office, right? Because I call it my confession and I call it an exorcism. Listen, when I say I grew up poor, it's called Food Stamp Warrior. There was a lot of violence. My mother was stabbed in front of me when I was 6. I was brutally raped for about 2 years by a serial child rapist in the neighborhood. You know, my first year of high school, I had a 38 shoved in my mouth and the hammer cocked. And I had to find a private school. So I was a high school dropout for 3.5 years. So what happened is I hated poverty. My dad was a deadbeat dad. So if I was going to be a father, I was going to break that cycle and be a good father. I wanted to get out of poverty, and I did it. And all of a sudden, my kids go to college. I have this nice house to myself. And I started experiencing nightmares, and I'd wake up crying in the middle of the night. I'd be thinking about my mom, or I'd be thinking about what happened to me from 9 to 11. And I couldn't understand. Like, I put it down. I was like, I can't do anything about it. Just move ahead, brother. Go forward. And that helped me for a long time. So the book is about unexamined trauma, how it can sneak up on you even 40 years later. Like, I never uttered a word to anyone about what happened to me as a child for 40 years until I started experiencing that. So I wrote the book as a therapeutic exercise, gave it to a couple friends, and they were like, man, you have to publish this book because it'll help other people. And I did, and I'll tell you, I'll never regret it. I'll never regret it because I've had grown men come up to me say, tears in their eyes, saying like, "Hey, something happened to me earlier. I've held it in all these years." You admitting it, tough guy from Detroit, Marine, right?
Yeah.
Admitting that not so tough after all, that it does hurt you, it does make you. I think that helped a lot of people say, if he can admit it, then maybe I can deal with some of my shit too.
That's amazing.
No, we
John.
appreciate you sharing.
Wow.
It's also opposition research 101 for Elizabeth Warren, because I basically admit to everything I did bad in life.
Well, listen, we're all human, right? At the end of the day, and thank you for sharing, the stories of you growing up. I think if anyone's
Thanks,
listening to this, like, we got to get this guy elected. John Deaton for
I appreciate
Senate.com.
you.
You can donate in crypto or traditional fiat, of course, and we're cheering for you. We definitely got to get the crypto folks behind you, but clearly from talking to you, you have a lot more behind you than just the crypto that I think I agree with. And so really a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
No, it's my honor, guys. I'll come back anytime.
Love it.
Awesome. Thank you, John.